Sending only robots to space is a difficult thing for NASA, but to send humans and to bring them unscathed is a sophisticated mission where failure is not an option. Spacecraft protect astronauts from deadly sun rays, but they also give them an Earth-like atmosphere so that they can remain alive. Pressurized cabins where oxygen tanks are installed for oxygen supply, and special filters are there to take out the carbon dioxide. If something happens to the spacecraft in space, then the spacecraft and its astronauts will get lost in space forever, and it will not be possible for anyone to bring them back. But you will be surprised to know that something similar happened to Apollo 13 in April 1970. It is an actual incident, which is no less than a science fiction story. 1 year prior to this mission, Apollo 11 successfully landed on the moon. After Apollo 11, Apollo 12 was also successful. But now, it was time for Apollo 13, whose aim was to explore the moon further. Apollo 13 was scheduled to land on a big crater, and this portion of the moon is called Fra Mauro. The commander of the mission was James Lovell. Joan Swigert and Fred Haise were the two module pilots. All three astronauts goodbye their families and went on the voyage. The rocket was launched on April 11, 1970 at Florida's John F. Kennedy Space Center. Not many people were interested in watching its live broadcast because this was not the first trip to the moon. The spacecraft had 3 parts. This cone-shaped portion was called the command module. All 3 astronauts were going to spend most of their time here. The portion resembling a spider was called the lunar module, and its main purpose was to land on the moon and take the astronauts back. The third and last part was this cylinder, which contained the engine and oxygen tanks, and that's why it was called the heart of the spacecraft. The plan was, after exiting the Earth's orbit, the spacecraft would circle around the moon, and during that time, 2 astronauts sitting on the lunar module will detach it from the spacecraft and land on the moon. After collecting the samples, the lunar module would take them back to the moon's orbit, and they will again align themselves with the spacecraft and head towards the Earth. After 55 hours of takeoff, when an astronaut pushed a button to check the oxygen tank level, suddenly a strong jerk was felt. This jerk was so strong that other astronauts sitting in the command module also felt it. At first, everyone thought it was another joke done by the module pilot, Fred Haise. But this time, even Fred was worried and anxious, like the other 2 pilots. Before they could think more, the master alarm and electrical power failure light started to blink. It was detected that due to a short circuit, one oxygen tank was completely destroyed. The mission commander briefed the whole situation to Mission Control at NASA. The authorities at NASA was in chaos after receiving this news, because NASA engineers knew the consequences of a blast in an oxygen tank. After a few minutes, Mission Control got the real-time data from the spacecraft. Then, they got news that not only one oxygen tank got blasted, but the other oxygen tank is also leaking. Along with that, 2 out of 3 electrical supplies have also been destroyed, including the main instrument used to drive the spacecraft. Handling all the problems at once was difficult for Mission Control, and then Commander James Lovell saw gas leaking from the command module. This was the oxygen gas that was leaking from the second and last oxygen tank. Now, all the lights were off, and neither did they have water to drink. Only one power backup was left, and the oxygen they were breathing in was coming from the last and leaking tank. Apart from these problems, there was another terrifying situation. Due to the blast, the spacecraft's direction was changed, which meant that if they didn't change their direction, they might get lost in deep space forever. On the other hand, the news was spread all across the world. The television networks that were ignoring this mission have now started covering the crisis. Along with the families of the astronauts, the whole world was watching this tragic news. The astronauts were running out of time, and it's been 1.5 hours since the blast happened. The last oxygen tank had 15 minutes of oxygen left for the command module. At this point, NASA decided that astronauts must shift from the command module to the lunar module. Fortunately, the lunar module had a separate oxygen supply, but the problem was that it was designed for only 2 astronauts. But there was no option. That's why they had to take this step. All 3 astronauts went inside the lunar module, and here, NASA engineers were doing real-time calculations to find out how long it would keep them alive. From the calculation, it was found that the lunar module can supply oxygen for 2 days. But the real question was, when and how will these astronauts be brought to Earth? To bring the Apollo 13, NASA had 2 options. The first option was bringing the whole spacecraft towards the Earth by using the main engine. But as this main engine was running on the last fuel source, engineers feared that the engine might stop in between. The second option was to use the moon's gravity to push the spacecraft towards the Earth, which would require less power. Although NASA chose the second option, but it too had the problem. After completing a circle around the moon, the spacecraft needed to be pushed by firing the lunar module engine to enter the Earth's orbit. The lunar module engine was designed to take off from the moon, was now required to do something different and quite risky thing. The calculations for when and for how long the lunar module engine needed to be turned on were complex. Even a small error in this calculation could result in a disaster. Mission Control sent all the calculations to the astronauts, and astronauts did exactly the same as they were instructed. After completing a rotation, they turned on the rockets at a specific point for 35 seconds, which directed them towards the Earth. After 2 days, the spacecraft was near the Earth at a speed of 32,000 kilometers per hour. And now they had to perform a difficult move. And that was, before reaching the Earth's atmosphere, they had to leave the lunar module and come back to the command module, because only the command module was designed for that purpose. Therefore, wearing the spacesuit, they entered the command module. NASA and the entire world were holding their breath, because it was time to enter the Earth's atmosphere without any control. During the entry, due to the extreme heat, the communication remained broken for 3 minutes. Even after 3 minutes, when there was no reply, everyone thought that they had lost the astronauts. But finally, it happened what everyone was wishing for, and the astronauts replied they were all right. Soon after entering the Earth's atmosphere, they opened their parachute, which is now broadcast live on television. Along with the families of astronauts, everyone was celebrating. After the 5 days of takeoff on April 17, their module dropped in the Pacific Ocean. From there, they were quickly rescued. Share your thoughts about this incident in comment section and subscribe our channel for more interesting and informative content.